Dumela, and welcome to the National Histories Podcast. That was hello in Tswana, the language of the Tswana ethnic group in Botswana. There you go. That's my greeting. How are you today, Alex?
I'm very well, mate. I'm not going to read out what you have written down on the script here, but I'm slightly curious as to why it's there in the first place. Let me just tell you, listeners, it's an insult directed towards me. It's totally uncalled for, unprovoked. So,
well, I had this theory. I'm pretty sure I caught you dozing off in one of the.
Well, no, you caught me dozing off in Australia, which is one of our first ones.
Yeah, so I put an insult in every single
just
one.
To wake me up.
And you never notice them. And this is the first time you've noticed it, and it's right at the front.
Yeah, well, what a way to start the new year, or our first episode of the new year, eh?
I know. Yeah, Happy New Year, everyone.
Yeah, Happy New Year.
Hopefully it'll be way better than the last, but I'm sure you've heard that from a million people already. I don't think anyone's gone, oh, that was a brilliant year. Anyway, so we're the National Histories Podcast. We do national histories. Each episode is a different country, and we tell that history. Lovely. So today is Botswana, and Alex, does it mean anything to you?
Does it mean anything to me?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I don't know that much, to be honest. I remember reading an article at uni about media freedom in Africa, and I remember that Botswana fares quite well in that respect, and generally is quite a peaceful and I think now also quite prosperous nation, although I think it has issues with certain viruses which are particularly virulent in that area of the world. So I kind of know that, but I don't know much about its colonial history or what it was like before the Europeans inevitably got there. So yeah, looking forward to learning a bit about it. Yeah,
cool. All right, good. The only thing I really knew before doing the research on Botswana, well, I did know a few things, but my first impression of Botswana was formed by Top Gear.
Oh yeah,
when they went and did their Africa special, and then they were on the salt, the large salt plains that they have there.
Oh, do they have large salt plains?
And basically the president of Botswana just jumped out of a plane and parachuted in to say hello to them.
As
and
you
I
do.
Just thought that would be way cool.
That's pretty cool.
If I think it was Gordon Brown at the time that I was watching it, was able to do that, and then I
can't imagine Gordon Brown doing a skydive, if I'm honest.
I don't think it's an activity you'd catch Gordon Brown doing very much.
No, definitely not.
So that was my main impression. So I had high hopes, and in doing the research, I haven't been disappointed.
Good.
So it's pretty nice going, I think. Generally, sometimes we read out some countries' histories, and you've got lots of incredibly dark periods in there. I mean, there are down points, but
comparatively, it does okay.
Yeah. So I'm just going to go into some interesting facts.
I think you should, because you're waffling.
Yeah, I am. So Botswana is famously known for being one of the 4 African countries which meet on the eastern end of the Caprivi Strip. Okay, now this is the only place in the world where 4 countries meet, and that is Botswana, Namibia, Zimbabwe, and Zambia. Interestingly, it is interesting, but it is also a fact about 4 countries, so I'm just going to do another one. So the current president, Ian Khama, is the son of Botswana's first president after their independence. Now, he is the son of Sir Sekrese Khama and Ruth Williams, who was of British origin.
Oh, yeah.
Now, they had quite a highly controversial at the time interracial marriage, and his parents were actually exiled in the UK, where he was born in 1953. And their extraordinary love story, which endured despite all the obstacles and the outrage that was prevalent at the time, has actually been made into a film now, or is being made into a film. I meant to note down what this film was because I haven't seen it, but I thought I'd better mention it just in case anyone wants. It's a pretty cool story, it sounds like.
Yeah, very much so.
Have a gander. But yeah, this is a fact. about some people in Botswana, but some of them British. So I'll kind of do another because I tend to do that. Sometimes I find a country and then just find British people that have done stuff there, and that's just not the right attitude. So Botswana is also home to the world's largest concentration of African elephants, and of which the highest concentration is found in Chobe National Park. So that's nice and cool. And who doesn't like a good elephant, right?
I mean, they are probably my favourite animal, I think. They are wonderful.
Yeah, I don't have favourites.
No, I know you,
I hate
you despise them all equally. Yes, but for people, for normal people with a normal, let's say, predisposition towards animals that I think most people have, I have to say I think they're pretty good.
Yeah,
Although you do like ducks and penguins, don't you?
Yeah, they're both good. They're both
Anywho.
good. Yeah, all right. So geography then. So Botswana is a landlocked country in South Africa, or Southern Africa. Sorry, Africa, I should probably say. It's not in South Africa, different country. So Botswana is topographically very flat. So as I said, which they did in Top Gear, they went across the Kalahari Desert, which makes up about 70% of the territory in Botswana. So it's bordered by South Africa to the south and to the southeast, Namibia to the west and north, and Zimbabwe to the northeast. And it also has a very small border with Zambia in the north, near Kazangula. And it's kind of poorly defined and might be only 100 meters long, but depends on who you ask as to how long it is, you know. So the Okavango Delta is one of the world's largest inland deltas, and it's in the northwest of the Makadidi pan, which is the large salt pan that lies to the north, which I'm pretty sure they also went to on Top Gear and sort of like raced in cars. So, you know, just so you know, Top Gear definitely didn't endorse this. I just quite enjoyed it when I was a child. And still it's all right to watch on reruns on Dave. Right, shall I get into the history?
I think you should.
Good. Okay, so archaeological digs have shown that hominids have lived in Botswana for around 2 million years. So that's well long, all right? So stone tools and fauna remains have shown that all areas of the country were inhabited at least 400,000 years ago. And in October 2019, although there have been many other studies that also say this, researchers have reported fairly confidently that Botswana is probably the birthplace of all modern humans about 200,000 years ago. Okay? So, as national histories goes, that's the longest, because they've had humans the longest. And I think that's where national history starts. Even though, you know, these humans definitely had no idea of what a nation was. But yeah, there we go. That's cool. So, yeah, and evidence left by modern humans, such as cave paintings, are about, 73,000 years old. So,
wow.
Some proper human history going on here. The original inhabitants of Southern Africa were the San and Khoi, and both speak Cohesion languages and hunted, gathered, and traded over long distances, okay? However, this all kind of changed when cattle were first introduced about 2,000 years ago into Southern Africa. And so pastoralism became and is still a major feature of various parts of the economy in Southern Africa. It became like the major feature of the economy. And because of the wealth enjoyed by lots of pastoralists in the area compared to the hunter-gatherer lifestyle, they kind of took a bit more political power. And this basically also changed the landscape as well, because obviously what do you need for cattle? You need huge grasslands, and that is kind of what happened over all those thousands of years. Okay, so it's unclear when Bantu-speaking peoples first moved into the country from the north, but a lot of researchers say 600 AD, so that's what we're saying as well. And it seems to be more or less a consensus. So in the area, the ancestors of the modern-day Kalanga moved into what is now the northeastern areas of the country. Okay, just as a little caveat here, Botswana, like many countries that were, formed of colonialism, a lot of their history could be about, several different groups. I'm sorry if I don't mention them all, there's lots of different ethnic groups that have lived in Botswana or live in there currently, and this would be incredibly long if I went through the list of them all. Also, their early history is definitely closely tied with that of Zimbabwe. So just bear that in mind when listening. I might be mentioning a few things that are actually, you might more closely associate with Zimbabwe as well, but that's okay. So these Proto-Kalinga were closely connected to the states in Zimbabwe, as well as to the Mapungubwe states. Okay? Now, there's a lot of evidence of a highly organized society, as indicated by sites such as the Dombashaba ruins, which is a cultural heritage site in Botswana now. And it was originally occupied towards the end of the Great Zimbabwe period. So that's roughly 1250 to 1450 AD. And some of the features here were like stone walls that are almost 2 meters high and stuff like that. So the site is a respected place for people living in the region, and it's believed that the chief lived on top of the hill together with his helpers or assistants. And these states, located outside of current Botswana's borders, appear to have kept massive cattle herds, which is now the central district. Apparently, like numbers approaching modern day cattle density. And so you can really see just how much these societies around in the area at the time depended on cattle, because of just the amount of density. And how they find this out is by dating dung heaps from like years back. So it's pretty cool to know that there's that organized society so much is just the cattle herding. So this kind of cattle raising complex prospered until about 1300 AD or so, and it seems to have regressed a bit following the collapse of the Mapungubwe states. So during this era, the first Tswana-speaking groups, the Bakgalagadi, moved into the southern areas of the Kalahari. All these various peoples were connected to trade routes that ran via the Limpopo River to the Indian Ocean. And trade goods from Asia, such as beads, made their way to Botswana, most likely in exchange for ivory, gold, rhinoceros horns, all the sort of things you'd expect African societies to be trading at this time, Southern African societies. Anyway, so the Tutswe Mogala Hill, which is an Iron Age settlement, they've done some radiocarbon dating for this settlement, and it kind of ranges. It's got a crazy range. So from the 7th to the 19th century AD. So they know there was continuous settlement roughly between this period. And so that basically it was occupied for more than 1,000 years. And the hill was part of a formation of early states in southern Africa, with cattle keeping as the major source of the economy again. Okay. So the Tutswe settlement included house floors, these huge stone walls, as I mentioned previously as well. There's also large tracts of Centaurus Thiliaris. It's a type of grass, basically, which has come to be associated with cattle keeping settlements in this South and Central Africa. Okay. So the Tutswe people moved westward into Botswana around 700 AD, and they also sort of began an agricultural and pastoral-based land tenure system. And so they grew like sorghum and millet and domesticated stock, respectively. Okay. This site was situated in the centre of the broader cultural area in eastern Botswana, and shares many commonalities with other archaeological sites in this region, in both ceramic production styles and also time frames of being inhabited, and the intensity of things like cattle, for example. So large structures were observed that contained these vitrified remains of animal dung, leading to the theory that these were animal enclosures that the Tutswe Mogala hill was thus the major centre of animal husbandry in the region, because there was just so much animal dung found in the site. So, and that's kind of, it's just, I know I've said it already, but I just find it amazing how it is just all based on cattle, you know, and just love that beef. Just love steak, no matter where people are in the world.
This is true,
except from here, with us.
Well, yeah, except you and I, for sure. Yeah.
So, agriculture played also a vital role in the longevity of the Tutswe Mogala Hills' extended occupation, as many grain storage structures have also been found on the site, and many different stratified layers of housing floors, as I mentioned earlier, are also on this site and have been in continuous occupation for over hundreds of years. So the arrival of the ancestors of the Botswana speakers who came to control the region has yet to be dated precisely. So members of the Botswana chieftaincy under a legendary leader named Kagabo II made their way into southern Kalahari around about 1500 AD, okay? And, or that's kind of at the latest estimate. And they basically drove the Bakgaladi people into the desert. And over the years, several offshoots of the Botswana moved into the adjoining territories, and the Bangwaketese occupied areas to the west, while the Bangwato moved northeast into formerly Kalanga areas. So not long afterwards, the Bangwato offshoot, known as the Botswana, which is kind of the biggest group today, migrated into the Okavango Delta, probably in the 1790s. So a huge movement of people there, but what you need to know is that basically there was a big movement of the Botswana speakers who came to basically control the region over the next sort of like 200 years,
and
300 years.
Just to kind of reaffirm, the Bangwato were an offshoot of the Botswana, who were the ones who came into Botswana and kicked out.
Exactly. Yeah, and so these groups were, they kind of split off and inhabited other areas and developed their own sort of linguistic traditions.
Okay. And they now form the sort of distinctive ethnic groups we find in Botswana today.
Yes, yeah, and but literally, like even the San and Khoi, the first ones that I mentioned, they still live there today. So, So there has been displacement of those peoples,
but they hadn't expelled them from the region completely.
Yeah, exactly. So
Gotcha.
Even though they might even be only like 3% of the population, they haven't been eradicated in the way that we sometimes see in our histories.
Yeah.
So the first written records relating to the modern day of territories of Botswana appear in 1824. And what these records show is that the Bangwaketese had become the predominant power in the region under the rule of Makaba II. And then the Bangwatese kept vast herds of their cattle, as, is the tradition for 2,000 years at this point, and used their military prowess to raid their neighbours, basically. Other chiefdoms in the area by this time had capitals of around 10,000 people or so, and so were fairly prosperous for the region at this time. The equilibrium kind of came to an end during the Mfekene period. I think that's how that's pronounced. I'm sorry if I haven't done it right. And that is roughly 1823 to 1843. And this is basically where a succession of invading peoples from South Africa, the actual country's borders, entered the country. And although the Bangwatese were able to defeat the invading Bakalolo in 1826, over time the major chiefdoms of Botswana were attacked, weakened, and basically became quite impoverished in this 20-year period, just because of the level of invasion and attacks, and the cycle of that is just drains wealth. So the Bakalolo and the Amandebele raided repeatedly and took large numbers of cattle, women, and children from the Botswana, most of whom were driven into the desert or sanctuary areas such as the hilltops and caves. Okay, it's only after 1843 when the Amandebele moved into the western Zimbabwe did this threat subside. So it took a while, 20 years or so, of pretty much continuous kind of warfare, really, which kind of drained the area of its wealth that had kind of steadily been building.
Yeah.
So during the 1840s and the 1850s, trade with the Cape Colony-based merchants opened up and enabled Botswana chiefdoms to rebuild. The Bakwena, the Bangwatese, the Bangwato, and the Batawana cooperated to control the lucrative ivory trade and then used the proceeds to import horses and guns, which basically enabled them to establish control over what is the modern territory of Botswana. Okay?
Right.
This process was largely complete, and thus the San, the Kalinga, and the Bakalagadi and other minorities were subjugated by the Botswana. Okay, so that group, the group of rulers are collectively known as the Botswana, and like I say, the San, Kalinga, and Bakaladi are ethnicities that still and cultures that still remain in Botswana, but they're significantly low in number compared to the Botswana.
Okay, because for a second I was thinking that Botswana was like a colloquial term for all people who live in Botswana, but it's not.
No.
Right, okay.
Yeah. So you can be Botswana and Botswana.
And Botswana, you can be, but sure.
Yeah, so you can, they're Botswanayan? I don't know how to say it. I should have probably known that. But they're not Botswana.
But yeah,
if you know what I mean. If you're from the San, Kalinga,
sure.
or Bakaladi. But yeah, I mean, that could be open for interpretation at the same time, but the articles I read, it seems to be that is the case. Okay.
Yeah.
So following the Great Trek, Afrikaners from the Cape Colony established themselves on the border with Botswana in the Transvaal region. So in 1852, a coalition of Tswana chiefdoms led by Selchele I resisted Afrikaner incursions during the Battle of Dimawe. And after about 8 years of intermittent tensions and hostilities, they eventually came to a peace agreement in Potchefstroom in 1860. Again, I butchered that.
Yeah, I mean, in your defence, there are lots of very, very hard words to pronounce in this episode.
God, that's quite difficult, that one.
Yeah, it is.
Anyway, from that point on, the modern-day border between South Africa and Botswana was basically agreed upon, okay? And the Afrikaners and the Botswana traded and worked together comparatively peacefully after 1860, okay? So in 1884, the Botswana and a northern-based Setswana clan's cavalry under the command of Kogosi Morimi fought and defeated the Ndebele division of the northern Botswana, and in the Battle of...
Don't even try.
Kutiyabasadi.
Kutiyabasadi, yeah, I think that's about right, yeah.
There we go.
Not bad.
So this blow to the larger invading Ndebele forces signalled the start of the collapse of the Ndebele kingdom in what is now Zimbabwe, and helped galvanise Tswana speaking authority over the area, now making part of northern Botswana. Okay,
right,
so even though they were quite at this time, like, political authority had basically moved. So before it was always along the river going out into the Indian Ocean.
Sure.
Right. Where they would want to trade that way. So they were always kind of dependent on whatever kingdoms were previously in Zimbabwe. But since the Cape authorities and, just modern technology moving stuff throughout Africa, mainly the British in this area, you basically had this dependence that dependence was eradicated because you had the Cape colonies to trade with as well.
Sure. Yeah.
So as that kind of relationship continued, you see that decreasing dependence on the Zimbabwean kingdoms, which is kind of why you see two different countries today.
Okay.
And so well, one of the reasons why, I haven't even got onto colonialism yet. Blimey. So basically there were some newly peaceful conditions and trade thrived between 1860 to 1880. And taking advantage of this peaceful stuff was Christian missionaries. So the Lutherans and the London Missionary Society both became established in the country by 1856. And by 1880, every major village had a resident missionary, and their influence slowly became felt. Khama III, who reigned in between 1875 and 1823, was the first of the Tswana chiefs. 1923, sorry, yeah. Was the first of the Tswana chiefs to make Christianity his state religion, and changed a great deal of Tswana customary law as a result. And so Christianity became the de facto official religion of all the chiefdoms by World War I, basically. Mm-hmm. So, a pretty swift conversion to Christianity, but no doubt, it was multiple factors to do with economics and stuff as well that helped this conversion.
Sure.
Anyway, right, colonialism. Let's get onto that. Well, I guess kind of missionary is kind of a form of something, some kind of Western involvement. Anyway,
spiritual colonialism of a sort. Yeah.
Yeah. Colonialism of the mind.
Yes.
So during the scramble for Africa, the territory of Botswana was coveted by both Germany and Great Britain. So during the Berlin Conference, which is 1885, I do believe, Britain decided basically to annex Botswana in order to safeguard the road to the north and thus connect the territories of the Cape Colony to its territories further north, basically.
Sure.
It unilaterally annexed Tswana territories from January 1885, and then sent the Warren expedition north to consolidate control over the area and convince the chiefs to accept British overrule, basically. Despite their misgivings, they eventually acquiesced to this fait accompli. The British kind of just said, this is ours now. And there was misgivings, but there wasn't like a huge load of violence in order to get this happening, basically. So in 1890, areas north of 22 degrees were added to the new Buchanan Land, which is what it was called, or Buchanan Land Protectorate. And during the 1890s, the new territory was divided into 8 different reserves, with fairly small amounts of land being left as freehold for white settlers. So during the early 1890s, the British government decided to hand over the Buchanan Land Protectorate to the British South Africa Company. This plan was well on its way into fruition, despite the Tswana leaders who basically toured England in protest and said, no, we don't want this. But it was eventually foiled by the failure of the Jameson raid in January 1896. Okay, so it was happening, basically, and despite lots of native political powers being unhappy about it. So when the Union of South Africa was formed in 1910 from the main British colonies in the region, the High Commission territories, so that is Buchanan Land Protectorate, Basuto Land, which is now Lesotho, and Swaziland, which is now Eswatini. They weren't included initially, but provision was made for their latter incorporation. However, the UK began to consult with the inhabitants as to their wishes, unlike what they'd done before, which is just take the land and tell them what's what. And although successive South African governments sought to have the territories transferred to their jurisdiction, the UK kept delaying it, and consequently it never occurred. And the election of the nationalist government in 1948, which instituted apartheid in South Africa's withdrawal in the Commonwealth in 1961, it basically ended any prospect of the UK or these territories agreeing on any incorporation into South Africa, because who'd want to voluntarily join apartheid? An expansion of British central authority and the evolution of tribal government resulted in the 1920 establishment of 2 advisory councils to represent both Africans and Europeans. So the African Council consisted of 8 heads of the Tswana tribes, some elected members as well. And proclamations in 1934 regulated tribal rule and powers, and a European African Advisory Council was formed in 1951 formally, and the 1961 Constitution established a consultative legislative council as well. Okay, so it's all going pretty smoothly this so far. So basically by June 1964, the United Kingdom had accepted proposals for democratic self-government in Botswana. The seat of government was moved in 1965 from Mahikeng, which is actually in South Africa, to the newly established Gaborone, which is located near Botswana's border with South Africa. Now, based on the 1965 constitution, the country held its first general elections under universal suffrage and gained independence fully in September the 30th, 1966. Now, as I said in the introduction, Seretse Khama, a leader of the independence movement and the legitimate claimant to the Ngwato chieftaincy, was elected as the first president, and subsequently he was actually re-elected twice. Then the presidency passed on to the sitting vice president, who then was also re-elected in his own right in 1864, and his name was Ket Masere, and then he was also re-elected in 1989 and 1994. And then Masere retired from office in 1998, and he was succeeded by Festus Mogae, who was elected in his own right in 1999 and then re-elected in 2004. So you get the gist. They kind of like this party and what they're doing, and they just keep getting re-elected.
These were relatively peaceful transfers of power within the same party.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, exactly. And there's not really any like talk of it all being like rigged or anything like that. No. And there is obviously the helping hand in that plenty of these people here have been like seen as, you know, lots of people see them as legitimate rulers anyway because they were the heads of chieftainships and
sure.
various powerful families anyway.
Yeah, so there's some continuity there.
Yeah, exactly. And then in 2008, the presidency passed to Ian Khama, who is the son of the first president, who has been serving. He was serving as Mogae's vice president, and before that, he was commander of Botswana's defence force. So yeah, really stable, uncontentious run of leadership, really, and that is something that we don't often see in post-colonial societies. So quite refreshing, actually.
Yeah, it is.
To get that. So despite this, no country seems to be devoid of controversy, and Botswana get criticised for their treatment of minorities, basically. So one of the classic examples really is the San, who there are about 10,000 of them still living their traditional hunter-gatherer style of life. And since the mid-1990s, the central government of Botswana has basically been trying to move the San out of their historic lands. So the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights and fundamental freedoms of indigenous people for the United Nations in 2010 described the loss of land as a major contributor to the problems facing Botswana's indigenous people. And basically they're talking about the San's eviction. The government evicted them from the central Kalahari Game Reserve, which is apparently a special example, and they kind of live in these like kind of makeshift camps and don't really kind of exist in a limbo between, you know, the modern Western way of life and they're, you know, trying to cling on to traditions but without any choice in the matter, really. So yeah, it's kind of, yeah, the game reserves are basically, they don't want the San like disturbing the game reserves, but then
I was going to say
there are so few of them that they wouldn't anyway, so it's kind of annoying. You know, what really disturbs the game reserves is modern society. But there we go. So among the recommendations of the UN's report was that the development program should include consultation with indigenous communities such as the San and Bakalagadi people, and activities in harmony with the culture of those communities, such as traditional hunting and gathering activities should be like provisions for that should be included, because it's what they've always done, and you're telling them to stop it because of your big nation state. It's
it's one of those where it's other examples like this have cropped up before, and it is slightly ironic almost that indigenous communities are sometimes accused of upsetting like an ecological balance somewhere when you think of like what modern nation states do.
Yeah, exactly, which is extract and destroy land.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm pretty sure Botswana is quite a big diamond exporter, is it not?
I'll get onto that in a minute. I can't remember off the top of my head, to be honest. I just always think that it's curious that that's the accusation that's often levied against traditionalistic groups, when you think that actually their activities are generally more consonant with their surrounding environments than what modern society does. Although, I guess there can be issues when it comes to say the preservation of certain species of animals. I don't know whether that's an issue. I wouldn't imagine it is. I would imagine that in Botswana's
probably similar to other places that have a poaching problem, but poaching problems are not usually indigenous peoples. They're usually like essentially criminals coming from overseas.
International crime.
Yeah, exactly. They're internationally orchestrated. Exactly. Yeah. So
I think that's definitely right, and I think in some ways you can see that they do have quite a good conservation record compared to other countries around there.
Yeah, I thought they did.
I don't see how making the 10,000 or so people living a traditional way of life across this huge range of
exactly
country, which is bigger than probably bigger than England. I don't know that for sure. It might not be, but of all the issues facing that, I can see why people might think that it's a good idea, but it's ultimately not fair on the indigenous communities, and they need to be able to make their own choices. So I thought I'd mention that because not every country can be a merry tale of happiness, but since independence, though, Botswana has had one of the fastest growth rates per capita income in the world. Okay, so Botswana has transformed itself from one of the poorest countries in the world to an upper middle income country. Okay, so GDP per capita grew from 1,300 in 1950 to $15,000 in 2016. So that's a steady, good growth. Okay. Now, although Botswana was resource abundant, a good institutional framework basically allowed the country to reinvest resource income in order to generate stable future income. So they've kind of managed to avoid the resource curse that sort of besets a lot of African states. Because it's kind of not a curse. It's only you've got to have sufficient foresight.
Well, When I say curse, a self-imposed curse as opposed to one that kind of just exists in the.
Exactly. But it's quite a common trope to talk about as soon as we come across it, isn't it? And we're guilty of it too. But basically they would always try and reinvest and diversify their economy, which really makes it much more stable economy now, and much less volatile when it comes to various commodities on the international markets and prices and so on and so forth. So by one estimate, it has the fourth highest gross national income at purchasing power parity in Africa. So it gives it a standard of living around the same of Mexico, okay? According to various indices, although, what does that actually mean? So doing pretty well economically considering, the kind of colonial extraction and all that. Anyway, so the Ministry of Trade and Industry in Botswana is responsible for promoting business development throughout the country, and according to the International Monetary Fund, economic growth averaged about 9% year on year from 1966 to 1999. It also has the highest level of economic freedom compared to other African countries, and the government has maintained like a fairly sound fiscal policy, which has only seen two negative, budget deficits basically in 2002 and 2003, and the rest of the time they've kind of been in a surplus. And they have a negligible level of foreign debt as well, which is really good. So, it's got the highest sovereign credit rating in Africa, and it's just kind of in a good financial position, and it doesn't really seem to have an economic downside. You know, the only thing that's really affected it has been its neighbours having various troubles over the years.
Having scraps, sure. Yeah, no, that's a very impressive record, I have to say.
Yeah,
and good for Botswana. I mean, that's good to hear. It's good to come to the end of an episode on a post-colonial African state and to not have to talk about, lasting. Well, I mean, I'm sure there is still poverty, and as I said, I think at the beginning of the episode, I think they have I think they still have a big issue with AIDS, don't they? I think AIDS is still Although again, then I think also they fare quite well in terms of national health. I might be incorrect in saying that, but I think
exactly. I did see the AIDS issue, but I feel it's a bit of a trope when talking about Southern African nations.
So I apologise.
Just goes, what's going on there? Oh, it's AIDS in it, and it's kind of not that.
It's definitely worth mentioning just from the perspective that they're actually dealing with it quite well.
Yeah, 100%. They're definitely one of the best countries in the region in terms of how they've dealt with it and how the public health authorities have gone into it.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember all of the facts on the issue, but
no, that's fine.
Generally it's looked at as a much better public health strategy than other countries around it. And part of that may be influenced by the different sort of... actually, we'll leave that. But yeah, so that's good.
Yeah.
It's a nice way to end it, really. Do you have anything more to say on the history of Botswana?
No, not really. I think it's interesting. I think as I said, it's a pretty impressive recent track record, and it makes for good reading, which is nice.
Yeah, I think this is the first episode that I've had the modern period bit kind of last for about 10 minutes.
Yeah, because there's usually it's like there's usually a series of really disruptive wars when, say, the colonial power tries to instantiate its authority, or there's like lots of rebellions during that period, or there's a really messy decolonial period, when power's just shifting between different groups and there are no democratic elections, or there's lots of fraud or whatever it is. So
exactly.
In comparison to others, there's been a minimal that's been minimal, which is good.
Pretty
nice.
stable.
Good way to start off the year, isn't it? Maybe perhaps this will be a positive omen for the podcast and for everybody as a whole moving forward.
Well, everyone knows that we decide how good the year is now.
Yeah, exactly.
Obviously. Right, okay. With that, that's it. That's your lot for Botswana. Thanks for listening. I've been Luke, your host. That's
I've been Alex, your co-host, if that's the right term.
Yeah, we'll let you have that title for now. But if you liked what you heard today, want to talk about it, whatever, join the Facebook group, follow us on Instagram, the usual social media stuff. Search for it, we're there. We try to talk to you. You don't talk back, so please do.
It's a bit of an echo chamber at the moment, guys, so do get in touch and chat with us a bit, because we would enjoy it.
We can share memes and things. It would be lovely. And also please, like it on your various podcatchers and on Apple Podcasts especially. Please write a little review as well. That'd be lovely. Thank you. Happy New Year, everyone, and we'll catch you next week.
Until next week. Bye, guys.
Bye.